Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series, Israel Insider. My name is Anaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are pleased to be joined today by Ashley Perry, who joins us each week to give us a top overview of the current events going on in Israel today. Mr. Perry will speak for 15 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A session. And if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen, or use the chat window the chat function in your browser window. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Achnaf, and good evening from Israel. Well, there's really only one place to start tonight, and that's with the attempted assassination of the senior members of what's called Hamas abroad in Qatar yesterday. Many questions that simply we won't know the answers to, perhaps even in the hours and days ahead. But some things we can try and at least see what is possible and what's not possible to understand about it. So first of all, why now and what happened? It seems as if there was an opportunity that simply doesn't come that often, that all the senior figures from, as I said, when I say Hamas abroad, that's what Hamas themselves call it, but it's basically what's known in the West as the political bureau of Hamas, the leaders that are outside of Gaza, the ones who are not fighting, the ones who we know, some of whom live in Qatar, some live in Turkey, some are even in Iran, Cairo, elsewhere. They usually live in very nice circumstances, in big villas. Some of them, as we know, Ismail Haniyeh was worth billions, I think, or at least hundreds of millions. There's a bit of a disconnect sometimes between them and the Gaza Hamas leadership, but they are the interlocutors between Israel, Qatar, the US, Egypt, whoever it may be, and the Gaza-based Hamas leadership. There's always been a debate: who's the moderate, who's the more pragmatic, who's the more extremist, who's what and whatever. And there's been a lot of back and forth. What we understand is that they were meeting in Qatar. All of the leaders came in from, or at least most of the leaders came in from around the region to discuss the American proposal, the one that was put on the table by President Trump. Hamas certainly weren't happy about it, but they were looking to see how to respond to it. Apparently what happened was, again, it's all a little bit murky, but from what we can understand, there was good intelligence that they were there. There was an opportunity, and it was taken. Israel, again, from what we understand, when it flies in these sort of missions, it has to be very, very careful who it flies over. It can't fly over the Emirates. It can't fly over Saudi Arabia and all some of these other countries. But it seems to have gone through Syria and Iraq over to the Gulf, and then shot through the Israel Air Force before actually entering Qatari territory, which again, we can argue for legal reasons, for diplomatic reasons. They apparently didn't successfully get everyone, because what seems to have happened is the meeting had ended. Some say that they went to pray in a separate room, but they left their phones with their bodyguards, and obviously that is what the intelligence was triangulating. And so they were charged. They attacked where they believed that the people were, according to the mobile phones, the cell phones, and that's why they killed bodyguards and wives and people like that, and sons of the leaders. We are now understanding that 2 senior leaders were injured in serious condition, one in critical condition. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens. And again, it could be a lot of this information is incorrect in the hours and the days ahead. But that's what seems to have happened. It wasn't as successful as some would like. But it obviously has many repercussions. First of all, Israel, as is its wont, gave it a name, Operation Summit of Fire. And while it may not have been successful in taking out the senior Hamas abroad leadership, it certainly had an effect in many other ways. First of all, most importantly, it sent a message that Hamas is not safe anywhere. There was clearly a belief that Hamas could travel around the region, at least the as I said, Hamas abroad, and especially in a place like Qatar, they probably felt pretty safe, or at least relatively safe. I'm sure after seeing what happened to Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran and some others in Beirut and Syria, that they probably didn't feel amazingly safe. And apparently there had been warnings from Cairo and Turkey. Interestingly, it doesn't seem to be Qatar itself. They had warned the Hamas leadership that they should be taking extra precautions. And so apparently someone somewhere did understand that maybe something was going to happen. There are also reports that this operation has been in the making for a number of months. So it could be that something was leaked. It could be something got out. It could be, we don't know exactly what it is, but it's clear that they felt safe enough to meet in the same room. They thought maybe Qatar would give them that level of safety and security. Let's not forget, it is seen as a relatively positive force by many in the West. Obviously, Israel doesn't necessarily see it that way. It's seen as interlocutors. It's seen as the indispensable negotiator, especially in this particular conflict, but also some others. And perhaps that's what gave them this feeling of safety, that being in Doha, even meeting together in one room was not too much of a risk. But what we now know, and what Prime Minister Netanyahu has restated very firmly tonight, is that there is nowhere that's safe for these leaders. While he didn't mention by name, that clearly means Turkey. It means Qatar again, even though I'll go into it in a little bit, but President Trump said he's given his guarantee that this will not happen again. But Prime Minister Netanyahu, speaking tonight at an event commemorating 9/11, saying that just as America hunted down those behind 9/11, Israel will hunt down those behind October 7th, regardless of where they are. And if necessary, they will do it again, which is probably not what the American president wants to hear, especially at this point. What this will mean for negotiations is unclear. Qatar said that they're suspending negotiations. I think that it probably won't take too much for them to re-engage with negotiations, because it's the reason that they are the negotiators is very important to Qatar. They want to be seen as facilitators. They want to be seen as mediators. It gives them a strong hand. They've been involved with negotiations with the Taliban and other parties in the past. They like this role. It looks good for them. Qatar are very invested in soft power, in their image abroad, and this plays into it very well. If they do not take it up, if they decide to wash their hands of this, then it will simply move to Cairo, and in the regional these internal battles in the Arab world, Qatar won't want to give up on this prize to Egypt or perhaps somewhere else. So I wouldn't be surprised if eventually negotiations at some level did return to Doha, but certainly it will become more difficult if the negotiators, if the Hamas abroad move to somewhere like Iran, to Tehran. It's going to be even more difficult, because obviously, as opposed to Doha, Israeli mediators certainly cannot go to Tehran. They wouldn't be welcome at this point in Istanbul or Ankara or anything like that. So probably it's going to either be Cairo or Doha, and Doha are very, very they keep this particular role very close to them. So I don't see them giving up on that too soon. Now, the big question that everybody's asking is exactly who knew what and when. So the official timeline is the American CENTCOM understood just minutes before the attack that this was happening. They called the White House. The White House told the president, and the president called Steve Witkoff to tell him to warn the Qataris. And the Qataris claimed they were only warned as the bombs were coming down, or even a couple of minutes after. There's a few problems to my mind about this chain of events. First of all, let's just go back a few months for the attack, the war between Israel and Iran. If we remember, after the ceasefire, there was this moment where Iran attacked with one final ballistic missile that hit in Israel's north, and then Israel decided it needed to have the last shot, so it took to the air to have one last bombing run over Tehran. And when President Trump got wind of it, he immediately called Prime Minister Netanyahu and said, absolutely not, you're not to do this. In the end, a compromise was made, and they bombed some radar system in a field, and that was considered that. What we know from that is it's clear that American intelligence in the region is extremely strong, and that was over Iran. Here we're talking about a very small country where the US has its largest base. The US would have understood what was happening a long time before, a couple of minutes before. And also, going by what happened on that last run over Tehran, President Trump called Prime Minister Netanyahu first. He didn't call anybody else. Why would he call Chief Negotiator Steve Witkoff to then call Qatar if he wanted to stop the attack? The first immediate phone call would have been to Prime Minister Netanyahu or someone in his immediate circle to say, absolutely do not do this, call this off. So to my mind, and again, this is no particular inside knowledge, it's just looking at the chain of events, I find it very hard to believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu would have done something like this without some level of knowledge and even some tacit approval. Now, was it a green light? Was it, yes, go your own way and with our blessing? It could be what they call in diplomacy an amber light. It's not, we're not telling you to do it, we're not telling you not to do it. I think it's probably more in line with that. And as we saw immediately, within 10 minutes, Israel's Prime Minister office put out a very strongly worded communique which said that this was solely an Israeli attack done with Israel's knowledge, with no one else's knowledge. And sometimes, you see, what's the saying, that the lady doth protest too much. The fact that they kept on saying this was Israel only activity, initiative, really sort of spoke to perhaps that's not exactly what happened. And even if you listen to what President Trump said, he said, I don't like the fact that it took place there. I don't mind the action, the target, etc. But I don't like where it took place. It's not the kind of language President Trump uses. If he's angry about something, he usually lets it know. And we've heard, especially, if we're going back to that Iranian event, we heard President Trump use 4-letter word expletives at the time, and we understood how angry he was at the time. If you look at his responses when asked, they were not even close to the same level. So again, I wouldn't be surprised if President Trump was in the know. Perhaps, and again, this might be a step too far for some, perhaps even the Qataris knew. Perhaps this was a way to put pressure. If you really want to get into conspiracy theories, and I don't usually, perhaps even the fact that they didn't end up killing the highest level of Hamas, rather sent them a message, could also be part of the disappointment and the anger at Hamas for not coming to the table, not ending the war, because there is a lot of pressure on Qatar these days from the West, from America, the likes of which we haven't seen over the last couple of years. And it is felt that Hamas needs to come a lot further with the negotiations. President Trump has put his ideas for ending the war on the table. Israel has accepted them. Now, while they are still far away from Hamas's position, the fact that Hamas were talking about it shows the pressure they were under, not to agree to it necessarily, but to at least come up with some formulation that would allow either negotiations to start or for them to sound like they're coming some way towards Israel and the US position, but enough that they could then throw the ball back in Israel's court. So it really does show the fact that Hamas abroad, or the Hamas organization in total, was under pressure to react. They didn't want to be seen as the party which was saying no at this point. So it is clear that there was disappointment towards Hamas. They had to react. So this can all play into the tensions. It can all play into this wider strategic game. Again, we will not know the truth. We may never know the truth, but we certainly don't know the truth about this now. Israel's keeping a very close eye on what happened to these particular leaders. While Hamas have officially come out and said none of the top 5 were killed, and they gave a list of those who were killed. Now it seems that some of them might be severely injured, but this certainly will become more difficult to negotiate at this point. Israel is entering Gaza as we speak, Gaza City, I should say. We talked last week about out of the million, there was only about 70,000 who have evacuated. Now it's up to about 170,000. Israel is trying very, very hard to get them out. Hamas is trying very, very hard to keep them in. They even created fake leaflets, the kind of leaflets that Israel drops whenever it wants to tell the local population where it's going to target and tell them to leave that area and where they can move for safer and more secure areas and humanitarian services. So Hamas have got every interest to keep as many Gazans in Gaza City as possible, make it more difficult for Israel to conquer it. But it's obviously very, very crucial days ahead, and the operation is underway. And it remains to be seen exactly what this attack in Qatar will, what the meaning will be, how it reflects in the negotiations, where the negotiations will take place. This could change things, perhaps for the worst, perhaps for the best. I think there'll be a short term for the worst, but perhaps in the long term there'll be for the best, because at the end of the day, the Hamas officials who will survive will still want to live, and perhaps they'll see the fact that they could be targeted any moment wherever they are. Perhaps will get them into a position where they understand they have to make a deal, they have to end this war, because an end of war will give them some level of immunity, perhaps. And these are people who are used to living in luxury abroad. They're not the people in Gaza in the tunnels fighting. So they probably in the longer term will want to come to some sort of arrangement. But for sure at the moment, it's, there are no negotiations, but I'm sure that will change in the days and weeks ahead. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, many thanks. I will start with a question here from Burak Korkmaz, who asks, do you think Israel would hit Hamas in Turkey? If yes, what would be Ankara's response, in your opinion?
I was waiting for that question. There's a lot of people who saw in Prime Minister Netanyahu's comment tonight that we will hit Hamas. I can't remember the exact language, wherever they are. And there's only really a few places they are, and Turkey is obviously one of the places. Turkey is a whole nother ball game. Let's not forget also Qatar. The strike on Qatar yesterday, I heard was the first time Israel has ever struck the territory of a non-enemy country. Qatar is not considered officially an enemy country. Turkey is a country we actually have diplomatic relations. They are strained, absolutely, and we hear Erdogan come out with all these sort of statements all the time that he's going to end trade with Israel and he's not going to allow Israeli ships to port and all this sort of rhetoric. But Turkey is a different ball game. It's an ally, and perhaps even more importantly, it's a member of NATO. Let's not forget Poland is also a member of NATO, and it was hit this week by Russia, and we didn't see all NATO nations rally round and defend Poland, but this is different. This is qualitatively different. I don't see any situation at this time where it would strike like it did at Qatar. Perhaps, again, I'm not saying that I have any inside knowledge, so don't take this any other way, but perhaps if they could do an operation where they could have deniability, that's something very different. But this was not that operation. There was no deniability. Within 10 minutes, the Prime Minister's office was taking absolute sole responsibility for this. So that type of attack, no, I do not see happening in Turkey.
All right, many thanks. Carrie Hillebrand asks, if the Hamas fat cats in Doha agree to a settlement, would Hamas in Gaza agree?
That's also a very big question, a very good question. Exactly what the dynamics are between the two groups. It is possible to put pressure on the Hamas abroad, the political level outside, but how does that play in on the ground? And also, who's dealing with things on the ground? You know, Israel's taken out quite a large chunk of Hamas's leadership over the last 2 years. So who exactly are you dealing with? Do we know who we're dealing with? Do they know if they're moderate or not, and what they're actually seeking to do? It's very, very difficult to know because things are changing so rapidly, both with Hamas abroad and Hamas in Gaza. The relationship obviously is there, and I've heard many different versions. Some say that Hamas abroad are more belligerent and more extreme, and some say there are elements on the ground that just want this war over and they're prepared to compromise quite a lot. I don't know enough about the internal Hamas politics to know exactly what's going on. And even if I knew what the internal Hamas politics were a year ago or 6 months ago, they're different today because simply many of the leaders have been eliminated and the situation on the ground is very different. What we do know is Hamas in Gaza is under great stress. It fears Israel's invasion of Gaza City more than anything else in recent times. And it is sending them into stress. The fact that they are even entertaining and discussing a deal which would basically give Israel everything up front, not everything, but a lot up front, the hostages, which I don't see why they would do, because then they basically give up all leverage, shows that they are in distress, shows that they do want to deal, shows that they understand that, you know, this might be their last opportunity. But again, after what happened last night, it's and what's going to come in the coming days, it's very, very difficult to predict.
All right, thank you very much. Lisa Bernard asks, where's the money for flyers and these other psyops coming from?
In Israel?
Presumably the fake Hamas flyers.
Hamas have a lot of money. They've been, first of all, we know that, leaders in Hamas have been stashing money for a long time. And every time there's humanitarian aid that comes in, they sell it at very high prices. You know, to make some leaflets isn't the most expensive operation in the world. If we're talking about general propaganda and psyops, well, Israel had a very big achievement by taking out Abu Obaida, who was the spokesperson apparently behind a lot of these, psychological operations against Israel, propaganda, etc. So it definitely is a big blow psychologically to Hamas. But, some of the things they do just involves a camera, printing a few leaflets. Again, I'm belittling it a little bit, but it's not massive amounts. And Hamas have stashed a lot of money away, and every humanitarian truck that comes through the UN into the Strip and other organizations, they take a very hefty cut, then they sell a lot of it on the black market. So they are making a lot of money. And that's the reason why they're able to replenish their troops, because they're able to offer troops more and more money. So when Israel kills a few thousand Hamas terrorists, they're able to then just, put $100 in the hand and, Kalashnikov in the hand of an 18-year-old. And, suddenly you've got another squadron of Hamas terrorists. So they have money. And these sort of operations are not that expensive. So I hope that answers the question.
All right, thank you. Karen Selkov asks, the European Union says that they will sanction Israel. Do you think that will happen, and how will that affect Israel?
Well, it's a complicated one. There have been many countries pushing within the EU, pushing to take some sort of level of sanctions against Israel for quite a long time. But the EU likes to do everything, I think, even legally. It's obligated to take decisions like this, where, any single country has a veto. And there are certain countries in the EU that have frustrated the EU leadership, like whether it's Hungary, Czech Republic, friends that Israel has in Europe. And this has led to a situation where the EU, the political level of the EU has tried to find ways that it can independently, without asking every single member nation permission, to try and take some sanctions away. At the moment, I mean, they are going to hurt Israel, but they are not the harshest that they could take. They're suspending the Horizon program. They're going to take measures and ban or sanction what they call extremist politicians and violent settlers. So probably, it will be against Itamar Ben-Gvir, probably against Bezalel Smotrich, as other countries have done. But they want to try and sidestep this veto by these countries like the Czech Republic, like Hungary, and like a few others, who are basically said to the EU leadership time and time again, we do not agree with sanctioning Israel, and we basically place a veto. So they're trying to find areas where they can have some effect without having to ask each and every member state. So that's where it seems like we are at. They are not the most biting sanctions. They're certainly not nice. And, Israel is part of the Horizon program because not because of any favors the Europeans do Israel. I was involved in the final negotiations for that. It's because Israel has a lot to offer in high tech, in innovation, startup, et cetera, et cetera. That's why Israel was invited to take part. So it will hurt Israel, but it will also hurt Europe as well.
An anonymous attendee asks, how is it possible for Hamas in Gaza to communicate with Hamas in Qatar without Israel intercepting the communications and finding the source?
Another good question. I don't know. I mean, I've heard of a few things that sometimes, at some levels, there's even just messages being passed around literally on paper. And sometimes communications can take days, back and forth. It could be that Israel is listening. So Israel knows what's happening ahead of time. It could be they found a way around it. And as I said, that's why it takes sometimes days for an answer. That's what Hamas claim, at least. Israel has good intelligence, but it certainly doesn't have perfect intelligence in Gaza, which is kind of ironic considering everything that's happened. But one of the major problems, and some of the intelligence officials told Prime Minister Sharon back in the day, is if you take every single person out of Gaza, you take every single IDF base and soldier out of Gaza, we lose any ability, or a lot of ability, except for SIGINT, to run intelligence operations. And over the years, yes, our intelligence has improved, but it's not perfect. And clearly, we didn't know what was happening, or we did get signals and we did understand something was happening on October 7th. But it's clear we didn't know everything that was going on in Gaza. Just look at the tunnel system that took us by surprise. Look at a lot of things that took Israel by surprise. So it's clear that there are still gaps in Israel's intelligence in Gaza. And that probably speaks to perhaps not getting all the information that we need to today.
All right. Thank you very much. Looks like we're just about at the end of our podcast today. I think we maybe have time for one more. So I will go to a question from Andy Palek, who asks, with the high holidays approaching, how will this affect the actions of both the government and in the war?
I mean, I was even with some friends earlier who are in the reserves, and, the big question that they personally have is, will I be fighting? Will I be in Gaza? Will I be called up during the high holidays? It's an important time in the Jewish calendar, but it probably won't have too much of a role in the military planning itself. Yes, every person, wherever they are, will want to be at home with their family during the high holidays. But as far as the military planning itself, it's not really going to be affected because, as we spoke about, I think the last couple of weeks, this war needs to be over in the next few months. It's clear that President Trump's, He's basically told Israel this has to be done. There was a point where we were talking about weeks. Now it seems like they'll have till the end of the calendar year. But such an operation could take half a year or a year. So they don't really have too much wiggle room. They can't wait till after the high holidays. So I don't think it will have an effect. Israel needs to do this operation as quick as possible. And that's really the timetable that the military planners and the political level will be looking at.
Many thanks again, Ashley. With that, we have reached the end of our podcast for this week. I want to thank you again for taking the time to update us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Of course. I thank you all again for joining us, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks.